Hello, we're at video number 25. We are actually halfway through the series now, and I hope these videos have been helpful for those interested in hard surface modeling in ZBrush. Today we're diving into creating the engine, so let's jump right in. First off, let's bring up the Gizmo. From its gear menu, you're going to want to pick Polycube. Then press Delete Loops. We're going to start masking points to create the basic shape of our engine. Go ahead and add in an edge loop. Then unmask the top points and move them up. Now let's rotate to the front view and weld it all together along the x-axis. Unmask that top poly and extrude it upwards using the Gizmo. At this point, we're just blocking out the engine's form in the easiest way possible. When dealing with complex stuff like this, starting simple is your best bet. Next, select Insert for the edge action, multiple edge loops for the target, and interactive elevation for the modifier. Now switch to the front view and gently clip the edges back with the Clip Curve brush. Next we want to choose Slide Edge Loop Complete. Go ahead and insert a few edge loops and adjust them by sliding the edge. Time to Q-mesh the poly back, then press Ctrl W to group visible. Unmask the top polys and give them a little extrusion with the Gizmo. Press QC50 and set the crease level to 3. Now we can add in some edge loops to quad it up a bit. This makes our creases look even better. Once you're done, press Accept to turn these dynamic subdivisions into actual subdivisions. Now let's set up the Dynamesh utility. Make sure Use Auto Scaler is on, then crank up the resolution to 1.5 million and set the blur to 0. Unmask the engine's backside and bring out your Clip Curve brush to create our shape. Do a quick Control Drag on the canvas to clear the mask, then Control Drag again on the canvas to Dynamesh. Now let's cut another section and give it another round of Dynamesh. Use the Mask Lasso brush to mask out our engine. Then grab the Clip Curve brush again to carve our form. Whenever you're making big changes to the form, it's always wise to Dynamesh right after. Hold that Shift key down to smooth things out. Currently, I'm just using the default smooth brush. Next, we're going to run a quick polish. Time to bring out the Mask Curve brush to start masking out our shape. The Mask Curve brush is going to give us some extra control. Now switch to the Mask Perfect Circle brush. Press Ctrl and Alt together to unmask. Alright, back to the Mask Curve brush we go to mask out the rest of the engine. Invert the mask and clip it back with the Clip Curve brush. Now we can control drag on the canvas to Dynamesh. Go ahead and run a polish to clean up the edges. Now we're going to use the Bevel Arc brush to redo these angles. Remember to Dynamesh after each bevel. The Bevel Arc brush is so useful when working with high poly hard surface sculpting. For the next step, pressing the Alt key will give us a better result. Lastly, run another polish to clean up the edges a bit. We're going to use the mask pen now and start sketching out her shape. Then we can grab the Mask Perfect Circle to continue our masking. Switch over to the Mask Curve brush to clean up the spillover. Next, let's invert the mask and clip it out. Let's go ahead and control drag on the canvas to clear the mask, then control and drag on the canvas again to Dynamesh. Then do a quick polish to clean it up a bit. Now switch back to the mask pen and take advantage of the mask rectangle feature to set up our mask. Invert the mask and use the Bevel Arc to remove part of the cylinder. Always remember, clear the mask and Dynamesh with a controlled drag. We'll be repeating these steps to remove this section of the cylinder as well. To clean up flat surfaces, I like to use the planar rec brush. Now we can control drag on the canvas to Dynamesh. Now use the Clip Curve brush to carve out a tiny bit of the back. For a stronger smooth, set the weighted smooth mode to 1. The weighted smooth mode is located in the brush palette on the top menu bar. You will find it in the Smooth Brush Modifier section. Next up, we'll be using the Mask Curve brush. After inverting the mask, clip back to Geo. Clear the mask and Dynamesh by control dragging on the canvas. And then run a polish with an open circle. The planar brush will help flatten the surface. and another round of Dynamesh will even out the polys. Grab the mask curve brush again and use the clip curve brush to move it outwards. Now if the clip ends up looking strange, the Gizmo will save the day. Go ahead and clear the mask and Dynamesh with control dragging on the canvas. Then run another polish with an open circle. Now we can switch to the mask perfect circle. Invert the mask and mask out the back. Use the clip curve brush to pull it forward. Go ahead and clear the mask and Dynamesh it one more time. Unmask the extrusion and finish up with a polish open circle. Let's begin by control clicking on the canvas to mask the model. Now bring up your Gizmo and select Polycube. Invert the mask and split those unmasked points. Then press delete loops. Now mask out points and use the Gizmo for some adjustments. Go ahead and delete the top and bottom faces next. Bevel the two front edges and use insert multiple edge loops with interactive curvature to give it a nice rounded look. Now we can press close holes and QC50. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Now it's time to add some control loops. Unmask the points and move it out using the Gizmo. Make sure the top is rotated at the correct angle. Press accept for the dynamic subdivisions and Dynamesh it. Merge the subtool down and give it another round of Dynamesh. Next we're going to smooth out the back. Then use the planer brush to level out the height. Let's go ahead and repeat this process for the front as well. Don't worry too much about the details right now, we're just aiming for the right proportions and surface level. We'll retopologize all this later with the Z-Modeler brush or the Z-Remesher. Next we'll set up our mask using the mask curve brush. Use the clip curve brush to pull back the geometry. Then we can clear the mask and run a Dynamesh. Go ahead and unmask the extra polys and clip them back. Once more, we can clear the mask and Dynamesh it again. Now we need to mask the model and bring up the Gizmo. From the Gizmo's gear, select the cylinder 3D. Rotate it 90 degrees and scale it down. Going back to the Gizmo's gear, select Extender. Once it's looking good, go back to the Gizmo's gear and press Accept to lock it in. Now we need to scale it on the Z-axis. Invert the mask and split unmasked points. Next we want to press Ctrl W to group visible, then press QC50. Delete the middle edge loop and Alt tag the 3 polys to Q mesh down. Unmask the bottom faces and scale them inwards. Now we want to add in an edge loop and scale it in. Unmask the bottom polys again and make some adjustments. Next we can press QC50 and unmask the side. Alt-click a flat surface to orientate the Gizmo and then scale it flat. Let's repeat this on the other side as well. Now we can start quadding it up with insert multiple edge loops. Unmask the side and move it out a bit. Unmask the other side and make sure it's going all the way in. Press Ctrl W to group visible and apply the dynamic subdivisions. Then we can Ctrl drag on the canvas to Dynamesh. Merge the subtool down and Dynamesh them together. Unmask the bottom and clip it up. Then make some final adjustments with the Gizmo. We can use the planer brush for a quick surface cleanup. Now we need to select the mask curve brush. Take the Move Infinite Depth brush and make some slight adjustments. We're just going to do a little bit of tweaking on one side to give it some more space. When we're done, clear the mask and Dynamesh it with a quick Control drag on the canvas. Next, use the mask curve brush again to set up our masking. Now bring up the Gizmo and while you're scaling, hold Control to inflate. Then run a polish a few times. Press Ctrl W to group the mask, and then Ctrl drag to Dynamesh. Select the poly group to unmask, and then carry on masking with the mask curve brush. Now it's time to grab the planer brush. We're going to turn on the lazy mouse, backtrack, and line. This is another option if clipping gives you any issues. Let's spend some time cleaning up with the planer and move brush. Remember, we're not chasing perfection here, just a decent base to retopple over. We're going to go back to the mask curve brush. Now bring up the Gizmo and scale it in just a bit. Go ahead and clear the mask and Dynamesh it. Press the B key for the brush menu, then I for IMMs, and pick out the IMM basic brush. Snap it to the top view and drag out a cube. Invert the mask and split unmasked points. Press delete loops and make some adjustments with the Gizmo. If you're not too keen on using the Gizmo to create your primitives, making an IMM brush with primitives is an excellent alternative. I made my own IMM primitive brush. I will link it in the description for anyone who wants to pick it up. Now hold Ctrl and move with the Gizmo to duplicate. We're aiming for a total of 4. On the 5th one, adjust the shape a bit. Go ahead and position it and make one duplicate. Now we can press auto groups, so I can mask out polygroups to duplicate. Now something we haven't really touched on yet is the IMM brush. So let's dive into that for a bit. IMM brushes in ZBrush are an extremely versatile toolset that can significantly boost your productivity and creativity. First off, they speed up your workflow. IMM brushes allow you to quickly add pre-made 3D objects to your model, saving you time on creating individual details from scratch. Whether it's bolts on a robot, scales on a dragon, or buttons on a shirt, IMM brushes are the way to go. They also provide a high level of detail. These brushes can carry intricate details within the inserted meshes, providing you instant complexity to your model. This can greatly enhance the realism of your 3D models, especially when sculpting things like jewelry or mechanical parts. Another benefit is the level of customization. IMM brushes are not fixed. You can create your own and share them with others. This gives you an unlimited palette of objects and shapes to play with. And finally, they can be very efficient. If you're dealing with a complex model, using IMM brushes can help keep your polygon count manageable. Since you're inserting pre-made meshes, you're not adding unnecessary geometry to your scene through sculpting to achieve the same detail level. So whether you're aiming for speed, detail, customization, or efficiency, IMM brushes and ZBrush offer an array of benefits that can make your hard surface modeling a whole lot smoother and more fun. Alright, back to the play-by-play. Let's add a couple of edge loops in the middle and Q-mesh that polygroup island. Go ahead and press auto groups. Unmask those two edges and scale them out. Give the mesh a quick control click to mask it and scale it down a notch. Next up, press QC50. Now, let's work in some edge loops to help create our shape. With our crease level set to 3, we might notice some crease distortion. But don't worry, throwing in some extra edge loops should fix that right up. Let's add a pair of edge loops to the ends of each rectangle. Use Alt to tag the polys on the ends to Q-mesh up. Once that's done, press QC50. Then uncrease the interior edge and press Ctrl W to group visible. Unmask the rectangle meshes and scale them in a bit. Let's unmask this part here and Control move it to duplicate it with the Gizmo. Go ahead and unmask both these parts and adjust them using the Gizmo. Grab the IMM basic brush again and pull out a cylinder. Move it down slightly and duplicate it over. Using the Z brush, crease the flat island. Unmask the cylinder, then duplicate it with the Gizmo. Let's move it forwards and scale it down. Go ahead and keep duplicating and positioning these until they're all in place. Apply the dynamic subdivisions and get that Dynamesh going. Merge the subtool down and Dynamesh it to weld everything together. If you're noticing that the poly count isn't quite high enough to hold the detail, just undo the Dynamesh and increase the resolution. Next, take the planer brush to level out the surface. We're also going to want to flatten these rectangles. It's also worth noting that sometimes after you created a part based on a reference, you might stumble across a different view that gives you a clear angle of what you're making. It's okay to go back and alter the model based on the new reference images you found. Let's finish up by control dragging on the canvas to Dynamesh and give it a polish. Now we can grab our basic IMM brush and draw out a cube. Use the Gizmo to scale it down and adjust its position. We're going to duplicate that cube and place it on the other side. Next up, mask the top and slide it down. Control clicking on the cube will unmask it for us. Now move it over to the opposite side with the gizmo. Let's isolate the cubes and press the Group as Dynamesh sub button. Now we can control drag on the canvas to get that Dynamesh working. Our next step is to grab the planer brush and flatten out the surface. The planer brush in ZBrush is a real gem, and here's why. One of its main skills is making surfaces flat, which can be a real lifesaver when you're sculpting and need to smooth out an area. It doesn't just average out the surface either, it provides a true flat plane. And then there's the flip side, quite literally. The planer brush can work in reverse to carve into your model, which is super useful for hard surface modeling. This feature allows for more defined edges and sharp detailed cuts. And there's even more to love about this brush. With the brush modifiers, you can customize the brush to fit your workflow, which really makes it a flexible tool to have in your sculpting toolkit. One of the most satisfying features of the planer brush is how it works with the lazy mouse. This combination can provide extremely smooth and controlled strokes, crucial for achieving those clean, professional-looking surfaces. So all in all, the planer brush is a pretty fantastic tool that can help bring your models to life with extra precision and detail. Let's start by masking out your model and bring up the gizmo. Choose the Cylinder 3D from the gear menu and ramp up those H divides to 100. Next, adjust the scale and position it into place. Then hold down Control and move with the gizmo to duplicate our cylinder. Unmask the cylinders and duplicate them over to the other side. Once you're happy with the positioning, clear the mask and press Dynamesh. It's time to break out the mask curve brush to set up our masking. Use the gizmo to move it outwards a tad, then clear the mask and run Dynamesh. Now we're going to use the basic IMM brush to drag out another cylinder. Adjust the scale and position it into place. Invert the mask and split unmasked points. Now go ahead and press QC50 and duplicate our cylinder with the gizmo. Now we can scale and move it into place. To flatten the side of our cylinder, select the Clip Curve brush. Then switch to QMesh Flat Island. Press QC50 and uncrease the edge loop. Now we can press Ctrl W to group visible. Then duplicate it using the gizmo. Clear the mask and move them up a little. Next, accept the dynamic subdivisions and delete the lower subdivisions. Merge the subtool down and run a Dynamesh. Then press Ctrl W to group visible. It's coming together pretty nice. That's the beauty of ZBrush. Every tweak and adjustment brings us a little closer to our final piece. So to save you from watching me Dynamesh cylinders and cubes for the next hour and a half, I've gone ahead and finished that part. Now let's dive into a couple of techniques that I haven't covered yet. To begin, we'll Alt-click on the mesh to orientate the gizmo to the surface. Then Shift-click on the arrow to align the camera with the gizmo. There's this really cool brush that I use for creating holes, found under the Trim folder in Lightbox, called Trim Holes. We want to set your focal shift to somewhere around 85 to 90 and adjust the size of the brush to match the hole size. Just a single click and you've got yourself a hole. The Adjust Last slider is your friend here, helping you dial it in. I use the same approach for the smaller holes, simply adjusting the size and depth. To soften the border, lightly use the Smooth brush. The Trim Hole brush and Cylinder Booleans is what I use for the holes for the engine. You might be thinking about using the Mask Perfect Circle brush, but at this resolution it won't deliver optimal results. Let's go back a couple of steps and Control drag it into Extrude and run a polish. And you see it still doesn't give the best results. If it was at a higher resolution, it would work better. The alternative here would be to group the masked circle, then polish the poly group before extruding it. For bolt heads and fasteners, I use my personal IMM fastener brush. It has 300 IMMs that I modeled in ZBrush. All of the fasteners are creased, ready for dynamic subdivisions. For finer details, I use IMM primitives that are Dynameshed. Here's another neat trick. Use the Mask Lasso brush. But drop the smoothness down to about 30. This helps smooth out any hand jitters. Invert the mask and use it again to sharpen an edge. Then Control-click to blur the mask and move it out with the gizmo. While the mask is still active, running a polish can bevel those edges. And that's basically it. These lines were masked and pulled out. Same with the ribbing. This part here was an IMM cube. Sure, the engine might look very complex, but it's essentially a collection of masks and primitives that have been boolean together. Little by little, it's all coming together. In our next video, we'll keep on working on the components that connect to the engine.